This episode of Bullet Heaven was made possible with a copy of the game provided by Degica Games.
Z9 Mark II Main and Alpha Cube System on Strike Formation Set Ready to Fight.
All the way back in episode 37 of Bullet Heaven, we took a look at Game Tengoku, the Game Paradise for Sega Saturn. We always loved how that one turned out, and the game itself was just a ton of fun to play. But there were a lot of aspects to the game that we knew would be lost on a lot of Western players, particularly in the realm of story bits and character interactions. And so, 21 years after its 1997 Sega Saturn release, and a year after its first Japanese release to PS4 and Steam, City Connection, Anikara, Kadokawa Games, and Degica saw fit to bring Game Tengoku to the worldwide stage with Game Paradise CruisinMix Special.
Game Paradise CruisinMix Special is an updated version of the first Japanese PlayStation 4 release of the game, titled only Game Paradise CruisinMix. It was first released in Japan on November 30th, 2017, with the updated international special version released worldwide on November 29th, 2018. It was also released on Steam the same day. Jaleco's parody shooter doesn't get the same kind of attention that Parodius does, but it's still pretty significant. As such, Game Paradise CruisinMix Special adds a ton of great content to what has previously seen release across all platforms, and also adds extra downloadable content to the, mix. Let's take a closer look.
Z Gravito Point up! Point up!
The gameplay in Game Paradise CruisinMix Special is more or less identical to that of the original game, largely because the original Saturn release is included in this one, minus a few features that are found elsewhere in the package. We'll get to that soon, but first, here's what to expect from CruisinMix Special in terms of characters and control.
On the outset of the game, players once again have their choice from a roster of diverse characters based on a number of Jaleco games that saw release between 1983 and 1989. Not all of these games were shooting games, though. Momoko 120%, for example, was an action platformer, and Butasan was a fixed-screen action game. In the original version, only 5 were selectable: Janus, Celia, Pig, Z9 Mark II, and Momoko. But the Saturn Arrange mode adds Miki and Masato, who pilot the Genesis 3 from field combat.
Players control their characters with typical 8-way control through either the D-pad or left analog stick. Unlike a lot of these sorts of games where each character would normally also have differing rates of movement, they all sport the same rate of speed. The main benefit to this is that the character movement speed is more or less Goldilocks. It never feels too slow or too fast regardless of who's being used.
All of these characters also feature unique firepower and bombers that set them apart from one another with various strengths and weaknesses. Players fire their character's main shots with either the circle button or the R1 button. On PC, these commands are mapped to the B button and the right bumper on an Xbox-style pad. The R1 or right bumper will fire a steady rapid shot in place of rapidly pressing the corresponding face button, but players can also hold down the non-rapid button to charge a character-specific special attack. It takes a small amount of time to charge it up, but unlike many of Saikyo's games, which feature an expendable gauge that needs to be built up, players can charge and fire the special shot anytime they choose.
Finally, players can deploy a bomber attack to clear out troublesome enemies and their shots in a pinch, or to heavily damage or destroy larger foes. Once again, each character's bomber is completely different from the last, with some being more localized or directional than others. Some even have multiple appearances as well, which we'll touch on later. Yes, we know about the thing, we're getting to that.
Players will encounter item carriers frequently throughout the game, which will drop a number of different items when shot. Power drops will increase the player's shot power by 1 level, which maxes out at level 7. This power level also applies to the player's special charge shot as well. Bomber drops can also be found in this manner too. These bomber pickups will add 1 more bomb to the stock when collected. With this in mind, bomber use can be fairly liberal, especially since the stock has a fairly low maximum before they just award points.
The most interesting drops to appear from these carriers are options that will add additional layers of minor firepower to the player's main shots. The hook to these options is that they will cycle through all of the characters in the game while they drift towards the bottom of the screen. When the character the player wants is shown, they can pick up the option and extra shots specific to that character will be granted. Two of these options can be picked up, which creates a triangular formation for each player. This adds a nice varied twist to the game on the whole and can be slightly strategic as a result. However, these options are lost at the end of any given stage, or when the player is killed.
Depending on the mode of play, Game Paradise will last anywhere from 6 to 8 stages. Classic Arcade mode is pretty straightforward, featuring the original 6-stage set for 1 or 2 players in Yoko or Tate orientation. The Classic Arrange mode adds new karaoke and console game stages and an extra character and ship set to the mix. With its dedicated story, it makes for a longer single-player experience, which is only playable in Yoko. Finally, CruisinMix adds Arcade Plus, which incorporates the 6 stages from the Classic Arcade mode in variable resolution Yoko. But mysteriously, no Tate. It features all of the characters from Classic Arrange, complete with online leaderboards.
Arcade Plus is where players are able to use brand new characters made specifically for CruisinMix. Clarice from City Connection and Homura, a pun for the words Homuran or home run, from Moero Pro Yaku, a baseball game for Famicom, also known as Bases Loaded. Both are definitely interesting twists on the Game Paradise formula and offer fans of the game something totally new from the original Saturn release. But there's a catch. These characters are accessed by way of paid DLC, and they aren't especially inexpensive. Both characters clock in at about $10 each, making the two combined 2/3 as expensive as the base game itself. When factoring in other DLC that we'll take a look at shortly, CruisinMix Special balloons to a title that costs twice as much as the basic game in the end, which could turn some players off.
Additionally, there is a third exclusive character available on the PlayStation 4 in the form of Tatsujin, the fan-favorite red ship from classic developer Toa Plan's game of the same name. The catches are even greater here. Tatsujin is exclusive only to the Special Edition and Gokuraku Pack in Japan of Game Paradise CruisinMix Special, with no other way to purchase or download the content at present. We can only hope that Tatsujin will become more widely available in the future.
What's here, even without the DLC characters, is plenty fun to play though, and while we wish that 2-player support and Tate was available in Arcade Plus, the same experience can largely be had in Classic Arcade anyway, so we're okay with it. This version of the game also feels more difficult than the Saturn version, which we had played not so very long ago, adding a bit more challenge to the mix. That the game is finally localized is really the main draw here though, which makes Game Paradise way more accessible to the Western masses. It was absolutely worth playing on the Saturn, and still is to some extent, but the extra features and localization push CruisinMix Special over the top for fans of parody shooters, especially with the online leaderboard support.
宇宙最強のヒーローがこの俺ジェイナスだ。愛機はファイターイエース。一点集中の高い攻撃力が特徴だ。
Taking on the online leaderboards in Game Paradise CruisinMix Special is a pretty easy thing to do when the simple score mechanics in the game are perfected. Getting a big score can be easy, but it takes a little practice, finesse, and a little luck to get the biggest payouts.
Obviously, players will get a good amount of pointage from enemy destruction, just like always. Taking out as many foes as possible does a good job of getting the player to their first extend at least. But for those looking to really maximize their payouts, they need to nab eggplants.
And they'll have to do it quickly. A number of enemies can drop an eggplant here or there, which, at their base value, are worth 1,000 points. But if a number of them are on screen, quickly grabbing them will melt the score for each to a maximum of 10,000 points. A gauge in the top corner of each player's side of the screen indicates how long the player has before these score-boosted eggplants lose their value, and it more or less coincides with how long the last score obtained stays on screen.
Some enemies can drop larger eggplants that can be shot to reveal 6 rather than 1. This is how players are able to get larger chains of eggplants, which can sometimes require a bit of timing and knowledge of what enemies drop them and where. Care should be taken though, since without bursting them, the large eggplant drops are only worth 50 points, because bigger isn't always better.
There are other obstacles like asteroid fields that can really drop just a freaking huge swath of them too, which is one of the more satisfying scoring points we've yet encountered. But there are also super eggplants that can result from a normal drop or an eggplant burst, which are worth a quite excellent 48,050 points each. Always a welcome boost, though these happen more or less at random, and they don't count towards eggplant chains.
The stage end bonus is also a great source of huge pointage for the player, with an additional bonus for eggplants collected, lives remaining, and bombs left in the stock. These bonuses are then applied to the player's existing score for the stage total. But there's also a catch. If the player dies, they will lose all of the eggplants they've collected to that point. They'll have to start collecting eggplants again from scratch if they bite it, and if players die at the boss, it more or less means their eggplant bonus is null.
In Arcade Plus, the player's obtained score can be uploaded to an online leaderboard as long as the game settings are set to default, with the exception of sound options. Time attack is also present, adopted from the classic arrange mode of the Saturn version, and all of the scoring points discussed apply here as well, with the exception of a penalty being applied for every lost life. There are 2 stages to time attack, a 2-minute mode and a 5-minute mode, which fall in line with a typical caravan-style game such as Star Soldier. The leaderboards are pretty fun to play on, and characters can earn scores for each character available, including DLC characters. Score uploads are not immediate though. Players will need to wait a little while for their entry to appear.
The score chase aspect to CruisinMix Special make it one that has a surprising amount of staying power, especially since the core game is as solid as it is. It's one that we're sure to come back to over and over, so others will likely find more mileage to it as well.
More than anything else in this particular release of Game Paradise, the presentation is probably the most important aspect of the game for Western audiences. The gameplay itself is fine and dandy, but while the game can be played by anyone on the Saturn, its best nuances are hidden behind an extensive wall of Japanese. Not so much anymore, with its fully translated story complete with subtitles the same color as each character's hair. Nice touch. In Classic Arrange specifically, there are a ton of great exchanges between Game Paradise's many characters, not to mention the antagonist's point of view. There's lots to see and hear in the Classic Arrange Story Mode and Data Mode HD, with expert delivery from every character voice actor in the game.
Game Paradise's visuals have always kind of been a standout, featuring a bunch of throwback arcade-referenced enemies, and a decent amount of large, decently animated pixel art sprites for the bosses. There are usually a ton of huge, amazing sprites used all over the place, though some of the pre-rendered stuff looks a bit dated, even by 1997 standards. Paired with some great backgrounds that sometimes even feature American Super NES Jalico box art, there's never really a dull visual moment anywhere in Game Paradise. Even in Yoko, the wallpapers pop and the interface is pretty clean and easy to see.
But at the same time, there's not a ton different in Arcade Plus that can't also be found in Classic Arcade, save for the high-def menus and super clean character portraits. On the other hand, Data Mode HD is quite a bit of a step up from the Saturn version's original Data Mode, allowing players to examine and explore arcade flyers, ads, and more, while the cast of Game Paradise makes fun of each other for, in their own words, sometimes lame art and lazy-ish poster design. It's often pretty funny.
And that plays into the sound design of CruisinMix Special. Everything from the original game is here, of course, with the addition of new pieces for the new menus and even remix tracks for the game. On the whole, the soundtrack works really well of the stages they represent. Much of it is more or less inoffensively average, with a few standout pieces like the catchy Lovely Star in the Classic Arrange Mode's karaoke stage. There is even a special English greeting from Yuki, though it's a tad hard to understand. We appreciate the effort, though.
I'm Yuki Ito. I'm very happy to meet you. International shooting fan at the...
We did find issues with the sound balance though, especially when using Clarice. Her main shots are just stupidly loud at all times, and once again, players may not especially enjoy having their chosen character constantly belting out a voice clip for every single pickup in the game either. Though an optional DLC voice pack, for another $10, adds new voices and even outtakes during normal gameplay. This DLC voice pack is by no means a must-have. Really, only Game Tengoku superfans are going to get their money's worth for this pack, but it's still neat regardless.
Of course, we can't talk about the presentation of Game Paradise CruisinMix without addressing the apparent censorship of Clarice's bomber attack in the PlayStation 4 version. Originally sporting 5 increasingly more provocative images for her bomb attack, Sony deemed her fourth to be just a bit too risque. It has been maintained in the Steam version, but is completely absent from the PlayStation 4. It does seem a bit strange to us as we feel that the 5th image is probably a bit worse in terms of questionable content.
Game Paradise's interface is pretty clean and more or less clutter-free, with an easy-to-navigate menu that cuts down on confusion for the player. Unlike the original CruisinMix release, the menus in Classic are now fully translated. Before the special update, they were actually still in Japanese. This, of course, cuts down on 100% of the confusion that came with it for players that were less skilled with the Japanese written language.
Rounding out the presentation for Game Paradise CruisinMix Special is a set of trophies for the PlayStation 4 version, as well as achievements and trading cards for Steam players. So, how does Game Paradise CruisinMix Special stack up? Let's take a look.
Game Paradise controls very well with standardized movement rates that feel neither too fast nor too slow.
It also sports very simple inputs, allowing for a confusion-free play experience.
This time around, Game Paradise feels harder than the Saturn version did, and the second loop makes for a very difficult challenge, especially for a 1-all.
Especially since only default setting will allow people to rank in. Game Paradise's challenge feels appropriate.
With a standard and enhanced arcade mode and a lengthier range mode in tow, a huge amount of gameplay can be had in Game Paradise CruisinMix Special.
The addition of multiple leaderboards for every character and mode really makes for a game that can be played over and over again, just for bragging rights.
Though they're no higher in terms of base resolution than the Sega Saturn version in any way outside of the main game's menu and title screen, Game Paradise's visuals are still clean and detailed.
A number of the game's supersized sprites are well animated and sometimes pretty adorable.
The weakest part of Game Paradise, its soundtrack is more or less average with the odd amazing standout here or there. The sound balance is also very wonky, especially when playing as Clarice.
The voice delivery is definitely the best part of Game Paradise's sound though, with excellent expert delivery on all fronts. Well, except for the super repetitive item collection, that is.
As far as parody shooters go, Game Paradise offers some interesting takes on the vertical shooting formula, with multiple game modes and vastly different character fire patterns and bombers.
The addition of features like online leaderboards and achievements might seem trivial in today's day and age, but not as many of these types of games feature these critical modern amenities, so they're a welcome addition.
Game Paradise does offer a lot of gameplay, so its moderate price point of $30 is acceptable.
But the 3 pieces of DLC available for it balloon the cost to twice that, which might not be worth its asking price to most.
Game Tengoku is a game that we were happy to have gotten a chance to acquire well over 7 years ago on the Sega Saturn, and it was always a title we loved playing. To have it back and more accessible than ever makes it a fantastic time to have a PlayStation 4 or a PC that can run it, and those online time attack leaderboards are calling our names. Game Paradise CruisinMix Special gets a 4.25 out of 5. You can get Game Paradise CruisinMix Special on the PlayStation Network or on Steam for about $30. Physical versions are also available on PlayAsia.com. Links in the description below. This game is so much fun. I can't wait to see what the updated Gokuraku pack is like. We definitely need to check out Tatsujin. Until then though, next up we have Degica's newest offering, Rival Megagun. This game takes a lot of cues from Twinkle Star Sprites and we really dug it. So how will this fare? We'll find out in the next episode.